Hey nerds, just Jamie here with
your friend Claude.
And this is Nerd Bomber vs. Movies, the show where two movies fight and we pick a winner. As you can see from the ambiance that we've created, it is our Christmas episode. So we have chosen two Christmas movies to celebrate the season. Claude, you want to tell us what those movies are?
Well, today, in our very special Christmas combat edition of this show, we have, going head to head, Ernest Saves Christmas and National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation.
That's correct. Two movies that have become Christmas classics in different ways for different groups of people. I'm pretty familiar with them both. Before we kind of dive deep, any sort of first thoughts about these two?
Not two movies I, right off the bat in my mind, would have necessarily pitted against each other. But, upon discussion for this show, they seem to make a lot of sense. Not only are they very close together in the time period that they came out, but also kind of both happened for both of us in a very formative era of our childhood, thus affecting our Christmas memories forevermore.
Yes, agreed. A lot of exposure to both of these movies. Neither of these are new to me for sure. I've seen them both many times. Kind of my initial experience with them came from different ways. Ernest, I more or less discovered on my own through the TV show, through some of the commercials, although we didn't get a lot of the commercials in our area. No. So most of the TV show and then the subsequent movies, Christmas Vacation, I became more aware of and exposed to because, first of all, it was my dad's favorite movie, period. Not just Christmas movie, but his favorite movie. And we used to watch it a lot as part of the family traditions of Christmas. So different exposures, different foundations, but I like them both. So with that said, I'm going to take over for just a little bit and we're going to go over the basics.
Hey Vern, you've got to see my new holiday movie. It's called Ernest Saves Christmas. It's a great movie, Vern, and it's all about how I helped Santa out of this tough jam and I had to drive the sleigh with all the reindeer. Let's see, there was Donner and Blitzen and Comet and Shorty and Lance and Doc and Sneezy. And Vern, those reindeer made one heck of a mess.
Ernest Saves Christmas, rated PG. Now playing at a theater near you. Check newspaper for showtime.
All right, I'm back with the basics, and we're going to start with Ernest Saves Christmas because it comes first chronologically, 1988. Directing here is John Cherry. John Cherry is mostly known for the Ernest movies. You name one, and John Cherry is likely the director. Writing this movie, we have Ed Turner. He gets story and screenplay credit. And B. Klein, he just gets a screenplay credit. They are both known for this movie, and that's basically it. Music is by Mark Snow. He does a lot of Ernest stuff as well, but he's also known for doing X-Files and Millennium. And then we jump into the cast. Playing Ernest P. Worrell, we have Jim Varney. Of course, he is also known mostly for Ernest, but he does have some other roles. He was in the Beverly Hillbillies movie. He did a lot of voice acting, specifically Atlantis, The Lost Empire, and the first two Toy Story movies before he passed away. Playing Santa Claus and Seth Applegate, we have Douglas Seal. Seal is mostly known for stage productions. He did a few films such as this one, Amadeus, and he was the voice of the Sultan in Aladdin. Playing Joe Carruthers / the new Santa, spoiler alert, is Oliver Clark. Clark is mostly known for small roles in film and TV. Most notable, he appeared in They Might Be Giants, 1976's A Star is Born, and on TV he played recurring characters on The Bob Newhart Show and St. Elsewhere, as well as many guest spots and single episodes on a variety of TV shows. So a lot of credits, but nothing super notable or iconic. Pamela Trenton / Harmony Starr is played by Noel Parker. Parker similarly is known mostly for doing a lot of sort of single episodes of various TV shows, including Beverly Hills 90210, Touched by an Angel, 30-something, many others. She also played Amy Fisher in a made-for-TV movie about Amy Fisher. Next up, as the sleazy agent Marty Brock, is Robert Lesser. Lesser, surprisingly, actually probably has the most extensive film career amongst this cast. He appeared in films from the 60s into the late 2010s. They include The Presidio, Die Hard, Great Balls of Fire, The Relic, 1998's Godzilla, End of Days, many others. And then finally, of course, we have the twin brothers, Chuck and Bobby, iconic in a lot of the Ernest movies. There's also a younger brother, Tom, who appears in later movies. But here we have Chuck and Bobby. They are played by Gaillard Sartain and Billy Burge. Gaillard Sartain is known mostly for this role, and he was the first CD in Walker, Texas Ranger. Billy Burge never did anything but Ernest movies. All right, so you can't really talk about the Ernest movies without talking about where the character comes from. The character of Ernest P. Worrell was created by Varney along with the advertising agency that is Carden and Cherry as a regional commercial pitchman and comedic spokesperson. In fact, the twin brothers Chuck and Bobby, along with eventual younger brother Tom, as I mentioned earlier, they also come from a similar background. So most of the creative elements behind pretty much all of the Ernest films and the TV show, as a matter of fact, are associated with the advertising agency and directly related to the Ernest character, which is why in the case of the director, John Cherry, and the writers of the various movies and so on, you don't see very extensive credits for any of them because much of the production of this movie and other Ernest projects were essentially done independently in-house, so to speak. And then they were distributed by, of course, this movie is done by Touchstone, and that pretty much handled most of the early Ernest movies. The popularity of the character in advertising campaigns is what led to the single-season TV show and then the subsequent movies. In general, the movies are not exactly critically acclaimed then or now, and many of the later direct-to-video sequels are indeed pretty bad, but there is fun to be had in several of the earlier ones. There's the four main bunch that I think of, which includes this movie, Ernest Goes to Camp, Ernest Goes to Jail, and Ernest Scared Stupid. And you can't forget that the TV show was actually an Emmy winner, so that cannot be overlooked. In terms of the pop culture footprint, in his time, Ernest was a very visible character, and this film was a component of that. The movies and the aforementioned TV show, along with the associated merchandise, kind of kept the character visible through a large chunk of the 80s and the 90s. This film didn't necessarily rise above the rest of the IP, but it was an important component of the overall success of the character. All right, we will now move on to 1989's National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation.
You better watch out. You better be good.
Can I take something out for you?
You better not live in the neighborhood, because the Griswolds are spending Christmas at home.
We didn't come to impose. Oh, hell, there's plenty of room.
Can I refill your eggnog for you? Drive you out to the middle of nowhere, leave you for dead?
Chevy Chase.
Everybody come out quick, look at the lights.
National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, rated PG-13. Starts Friday, December 1st at a theater near you.
Directing, we have Jeremiah S. Chechik. Chechik actually has pretty limited credits as a director. This is by far his most significant project. He also did Benny and June and the Avengers, not those Avengers, the British Avengers. Writing, we have the iconic John Hughes. Hughes movies, as if anybody had to have those pointed out, he's famous for doing a lot of movies in the 80s and the 90s. 16 Candles, Breakfast Club, Weird Science, Pretty in Pink, Uncle Buck, Home Alone, many others, lots of classics from the era. Doing music here, we have Angelo Badalamenti. He's known for working largely with David Lynch, and two of his most significant works are on Twin Peaks and Blue Velvet. So an odd choice, but he works here. All right, casting. We have Clark Griswold, played by Chevy Chase. Chevy Chase is, of course, known for SNL, Caddyshack, Funny Farm. In latter years, he was known for the sitcom Community. Ellen Griswold, Clark's wife, is played by Beverly D'Angelo. D'Angelo is most known probably for this role, but she also played Patsy Cline in Coal Miner's Daughter. She was in A Streetcar Named Desire. She was in Hair, American History X, and many others. She has a very significant film career. The Griswold kids in this film, Russ and Audrey, they are played by Johnny Galecki and Juliette Lewis, played by different actors in each film. That's who you have for Christmas Vacation. Johnny Galecki is known for Big Bang Theory and Prancer. Juliette Lewis is known for Cape Fear and Natural Born Killers and a lot of indie films. Cousin Eddie Johnson, who really, they don't mention that last name very often. Even I had to look this one up, and I've seen this movie many times. Cousin Eddie Johnson is played by Randy Quaid. Randy Quaid is known largely for this. Other movies he's been in include Independence Day, Days of Thunder, and he did a made-for-TV sequel to Christmas Vacation, as a matter of fact. All right, so there's a big cast after that. Those are the main players. We have Eddie's wife, Catherine, played by Miriam Flynn. We have Clark's parents, played by John Randolph and Diane Ladd. We have Ellen's parents, played by E.G. Marshall and Doris Roberts. And then we have Eddie and Catherine's kids, played by Cody Berger and Ellen Hamilton Latson. All right, Clark's ancient aunt and uncle, Bethany and Lewis, are played by Mae Questel, that is, and Sam McMurray. And finally, Clark's boss, Mr. Shirley, played by Brian Doyle Murray. I said finally, but there's more. Clark's yuppie neighbors, Margot and Todd, are played by Julia Louis-Dreyfus and Nicholas Guest. And that pretty much sums up just about all the cast, as a matter of fact. In terms of pop culture footprint, pretty good here, actually. Adjusted, it is the most financially successful film in the Vacation franchise, and it's maintained a pretty healthy pop culture relevance. The film airs on TV fairly regularly, not just during the Christmas season. You can find it on cable pretty much any time during the year. And there's still new merchandise every year featuring the characters, the quotes from the film, and all of those things are consistently available even today. All right, so I think that's it for the basics. Claude's going to be back, and he's going to give you the tale of the tape.
Greetings, festive fight fans and movie buffs. I am your friend Claude, here with tonight's Tale of the Tape for our main event of the evening, Ernest Saves Christmas versus National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. So, in the spirit of Christmas, let's start, as we do with every other non-Christmas movie, by discussing and comparing the distributing studios for both movies. For Ernest Saves Christmas, we have Buena Vista Pictures, which, by any other name, is essentially Disney, for those who might not be in the know. For National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, the legendary Warner Brothers Pictures. Moving on to the ratings, they're slightly mismatched. Ernest may surprise you by coming in with a PG rating, and Christmas Vacation carries a PG-13 rating for any number of things that, if you've seen it once, you understand why. So, moving down to the running time, let's see how they match up. Fairly evenly. Ernest clocks in at a tight 95 minutes, where Christmas Vacation comes in at 97 minutes. And just upon my own watching experiences, I would almost have guessed that those times belonged to the opposite movies. The pacing in Christmas Vacation has always been one of the features of it that sticks with me the most. Just the way they kind of set up everything and organize all the chaos. As far as budget, though, and how they paid for that chaos, Ernest had a modest budget of $6.5 million. You know, a smaller movie in the late 80s. That's not really anything to sneeze at. Whereas Christmas Vacation was the third in the Vacation movie series and comes in with a pretty impressive budget for the time of $25 million. And I think they do a good job of showing that on screen. Now, as far as how the earnings compare, well, Ernest didn't do too bad. On a $6.5 million budget, it made $28.2 million, which is nearly 4.5 times its budget. And Christmas Vacation, of course, was also no slouch, making $73.3 million, nearly tripling its budget. But comparatively, Ernest holds its own, which surprised me when putting together the numbers for this tale of the tape. So that is how they shake out this holiday season. Now let's open the doors and settle some scores.
All right, we're back. We're going to talk about some scores now. We're going to do things a little bit different than we've done in the past, but I think you'll catch on without too much explanation. So, round one, visuals. we'll talk Ernest Saves Christmas first, and I will go first. For visuals, I'm giving Ernest Saves Christmas a 7. It's mostly competent. There's not a lot special going on with this movie in terms of cinematography, in terms of lighting. It gets a little bit of boost because they do try to pull off a little ambition. There are some special effects throughout the movie, actually. There's some really clever, very simple but clever and effective visuals done with the flying reindeer. And right at the end, there are some optical effects as well. And then Ernest movies and Ernest, the TV show as well, tends to do some pretty unique things with like fisheye lenses with certain ways that they do the comedy. And so it has some unique touches that you might not see in a typical sort of comedy film of this era. But for the most part, it's kind of simply framed and simply shot. So competently, yes, with a couple little high spots. So I'm giving it a 7. I feel like it's a pretty solid 7 for me.
Well, for me, in terms of what I would visually score Ernest Saves Christmas, I'm going to go just below that with a 6, which meets our universally accepted standard for good.
Yes.
And that's exactly what this is, good. Visually, you're not being, it's as mentioned in the previous segment, it's a $6.5 million budget, and you're not being blown out of the water with like wall-to-wall effects or, any kind of massively daring stunts, what have you. But as is a hallmark of the Ernest series, going back to the TV show and even the commercials, they make insanely creative use out of what they have to work with. Mm-hmm. And that is very much on display in this movie.
All right, so now we will talk about Christmas Vacation. And I give the visuals for Christmas Vacation also a 7 for my part. I think it's very similar in terms of it's competently shot, but there's not a lot special going on with the movie. Christmas Vacation especially is just more about the comedy. It's not so much about the way the comedy is shot. So again, it's very competent. It's very well done. We talked about 6 is the border for good. I've got it up to a 7. One of the reasons it gets that little bit of boost is just a couple of clever things throughout the movie. One is the intro, the animated credits intro.
Right.
That gives it a little bit of a boost. And I've always been a fan of the visual gag of Clark doing the sledding down the hill. When he rears back a couple times, and then when he goes, it's just a flash of light and an explosion. There's no actual movement down the hill. They just present the movement as so fast, it's a simultaneous flash. And it's just like one little moment, but it's so clever and so well pulled off that I give it a lot of credit for that one shot. But otherwise, yeah, it's just kind of very, it's shot in a very typical way for a comedy of its time. So I've already used this word too many times to talk about both these movies, but it just seems mostly very competent, not necessarily special in terms of the visual production.
Okay, in terms of what I would score the visuals for Christmas Vacation, I also give it a 7. I think that even though it is a little more than, I guess, by the numbers in terms of cinematography, it still somehow manages to do a really good job of capturing the feeling that it wants to portray. The whole thing is almost visually like a warm memory. Like looking at a Christmas from, that you remember from years past. And whether that's accidental or purposeful, I don't know. But that's kind of the vibe I get when I look at it. And I go up to a 7 in my comparison to the Ernest score of 6 for this movie because in the absence of mind-blowing effects, you look to the strength of the iconography. And in this movie, few others can compare with what is now such visually legendary sights as Cousin Eddie's RV, the dickie he wears under his ridiculous Christmas sweater, and just throw a dart at the things in this movie and you come away with a legendary visual. So that elevates my visual score a little bit beyond just the cinematography.
All right, so that's one round down. We're going to move on to the next round now, and that is performances. And again, we'll start with Ernest Saves Christmas, that is. So I'm giving this movie a 7.5 for performances. You might think that I would go higher on something like that because Ernest, the character, and Jim Varney, the actor, are known for being just 100%. he was sort of Jim Carrey before there was a Jim Carrey in a lot of ways.
Proto Jim Carrey.
Yes, yeah, that's a good way to but I have to say, like, a lot of the other actors in the movie are just doing sort of exactly what the character is and not really stretching necessarily. Santa Claus character is very much feels like sort of a very safe, warm and fuzzy Santa Claus. Noelle Parker does a pretty good job as Harmony Starr, actually, for somebody that doesn't have a lot of acting credits, actually. She pulls off sort of that, sort of a punky Brewster mixed with sort of a youthful transient with a heart of gold type of situation.
Right.
And so she has a lot of fun. And you mentioned this off camera, she's got to keep up with Jim Varney and his over-the-top ridiculousness.
Yeah.
And she also has to sort of like bring it down when she's interacting with the Santa Claus character and having her own sort of emotional journey. So like there's something going on there that I think deserves a little bit of credit.
Agreed.
So everybody's good. And so you'd say like, okay, well you're talking about a 6, maybe a 6.5, but you get a whole point beyond that. And I'm going to 7.5 because you have Jim Varney.
Right.
You have Jim Varney doing Ernest, but you also have Jim Varney doing bits, playing the other characters, playing the side characters. It's one of my favorite scenes when he plays the snake handler. So that's a really good bit. And he plays sort of like the government snob coming to inspect the jail or whatever when they break out Santa. And so he gets to have those moments. And the Hay Verne scene is great too. And Jim Varney puts like 100% effort into all of these moments. So it's very impressive. And so that's what brings me to 7.5 as my performance score for Ernest Saves Christmas.
Well, my performance score is identical for Ernest Saves Christmas. I also give it a 7.5. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I can't add a lot to what you said because it's basically for the same reasons. I mean, Jim Varney is a human special effect. And that's brilliantly on display in this movie. And if you have not seen this movie or have not seen it in a long time, I would say that is your number one reason to give it another watch. As you said, I mean, in addition to playing Ernest, he gets no fewer than 3 additional distinct characters to switch between in this movie. And the switching between is another element for me that bumps up the performance score, because we were saying while watching it off camera that you don't really get an opportunity to see that in any other Ernest media, where this movie shows him transitioning between having just played the government snob character, but then now he's back as Ernest, but not out of the government costume. So it's like this weird balancing act, and he does it again with his old woman character later in the movie.
He does it with the snake character too, because
that's right.
They put the real snakes in his truck, and he goes. He
comes out a little bit.
Yeah. So it's something that you don't see. Usually, he becomes these characters. And then one cutaway, and he's Ernest again.
Right.
It's sort of like a little bit of Ernest magic happening. But in this movie, there's a transition. Yeah.
And like he just has to be. You think of him playing Ernest as the baseline character, so you almost don't recognize what's happening right away. But then you kind of, if you pay attention to it, it's really something special. I thought. Yeah. And again, I really think Noelle Parker did a great job, and Douglas Steele as the Santa Claus character for most of the movie is solid. But yeah, performances for me, 7.5 as well.
All right, so that moves us on to performances for Christmas Vacation, and here's where the rubber meets the road a little bit. My performance score for Christmas Vacation is 9. That is near enough to the highest score I've ever given any movie for anything. We may have gone 9.5. I've never given a 10 in any category, so we're getting up there now. Performances are just great across the board. I think the reason that it separates from Ernest Saves Christmas is a little bit is because there are so many good performances. There's multiple good performances from multiple performers. So obviously you start with Chevy Chase as Clark Griswold. So much going on here. He doesn't have the rubber face of a Jim Varney, but he's great with physical comedy. He has a talent for small physical comedy and large physical comedy. He has a talent for ranting and going off on long diatribes. So Beverly D'Angelo is also great as his sort of like long-suffering wife, and the parents each get their moment. They are in big chunks of the movie. Sometimes they don't always get like character moments. That's not really why they're there, except for Clark Griswold Sr. Gets a nice little scene with Clark at the end of the movie that has like an actual emotional heft.
Right.
The rest of the parental characters don't really get that, but they're doing solid work as their sort of like background, not even background, just sort of not quite gimmicked either, but just in supporting roles, and they each get their moment.
Yeah.
Then of course you have Randy Quaid showing up as Cousin Eddie, and he takes it again. So it's him and Chevy Chase are kind of going head to head in many scenes, you know, and you have very different approaches, and they really balance each other well, because Chevy Chase tends to give this very like dry performance, and then Randy Quaid is up here all the time, but they really match each other well, and just physically speaking, neither of them get dominated by the other, because I think that happens in a lot of movies, because both these guys are like 6'4" or something like that. I think actually Randy Quaid's a little taller. But they both can sort of compete with each other, even sort of in a physical way.
That's true.
So it's really interesting to watch them sort of like share screen time. And then even the neighbors, Margot and Todd, they also have like great, hilarious, funny moments. Julia Louis-Dreyfus, like she shines. I mean, so she really was getting off to a great start for her career. Yeah. And she had already started, I know. But anyway, just really good performances across the board. And really good, funny moments. And a lot of the iconic moments of the movie, that's how I know, like you talk about iconic visuals and iconic lines to remember.
Right.
There's a lot of iconic moments in this movie that are not spoken word, and it's not because they're shot interestingly. Right. It's because one of the actors is pulling off the performance.
Yep.
So whether that's Eddie emptying the shitter, or whether it's Clark taking like floorboards to the face, like those are the actors doing those, performing those moments. And so that's why I think that this movie really gets high marks, because not only is it funny across the board because of their performances, but they also have iconic moments that you can't necessarily chalk up to like dialogue or cinematography. Exactly. So, performances for Christmas Vacation, 9.
I am similarly high and even higher on the performances in this movie, and I go 9.5.
Wow.
For a lot of the same reasons. In contrast to Ernest, where, you know, I mean, I guess you could correlate directly Jim Varney and Chevy Chase as the centerpieces in their physical comedy prowess and whatnot. But whereas Jim Varney is kind of the only one in that ballpark in the Ernest cast, the Christmas Vacation cast is loaded with a range of pretty impressive acting talent, from, you know, solid character actors all the way to long seasoned veteran actors. And they all just, if you look at things like chemistry, they all mix together perfectly in this movie. Maybe more than virtually any other ensemble cast I can think of on film. Just all of the elements that they bring individually just melded together in the perfect way for this movie to work the way it did. And I think the physicality aspect that you mentioned is a key piece of that. Again, it's, you know, you see it in Ernest, but you just see it far more across the board in Christmas Vacation, where it's, like you say, it's not just about performing, speaking dialogue, like I'm acting. It's about physically inhabiting the character. And again, that's done by everybody in this movie in such a way that it's easy to forget that you're watching an actor performing a character. Yeah. And it just stands out as really effective for me. To bring it home on performances, I'm going to contribute a personal anecdote. I used to work at Toys R Us with a woman who is good friends with and went to college with the guy who plays the mailman who brings Clark Griswold's bonus to the house. And even that guy, in his tiny little moment to shine, absolutely does. Yep. This is for Clark W. Griswold. It's perfect.
Merry Christmas as the door closes in his face. Yep. Yeah, totally, 100%.
They gave him 30 seconds total, maybe, and he just grabbed it and ran with it.
Yep, absolutely.
So performances for me, 9.5.
All right. So that brings us to the third round, which is writing. And again, we're going to start with Ernest. I'm going 7. Again, it's above that level of good, and a lot of it comes from this movie does a surprisingly good job of balancing a couple different things here. There's an overall narrative. There's actually sort of like 2 narratives in the movie that really run well parallel without it feeling like it's too busy, because you have the story of the Harmony star,
Right.
you know, Pamela. The story of this young girl's sort of, you know, running away from home and trying to find herself, and then kind of coming back to the Heart of Gold situation. Then you have like the Santa Claus story where he's trying to pass on the mantle of Santa to the next person.
Right.
And then you're mixing Ernest into that while having those kind of cutaway gags of him doing the characters, which they fit into the story, but you don't need that. That's just a reason to have Jim Varney do that for fun.
Exactly.
But I think it works pretty well for what it is. And then you also have cutaways with Chuck and Bobby, like I already mentioned. So
right.
The movie is actually, I think, doing a surprisingly good job at balancing elements that might not necessarily fit together. And I don't think, I mean, I can't think of another movie that does anything like that.
It's a good point. It's
Yeah,
pretty unique.
if I sat and thought about it long enough, maybe I could come up with something, but it's pretty unique in that way.
Yeah.
So yeah, and that's all part of the writing. I mean, Jim Varney performs those things, of course, but I mean, those are written in, and I think like the movement of those, the intertwining of those plots, I think is handled pretty well for a movie of this caliber. And again, as I said in the basics, these Ernest movies are made by people who are not necessarily like Hollywood, you know, big time Hollywood types.
Right.
These are like advertising people who write commercials and maybe TV. And I think the writers of this movie, essentially their only credits are writing this movie. And I mean, for a single writing credit, you could do a lot worse than what this is.
Absolutely.
To come in with no experience and say, we're going to do 2 plot lines and we're going to mix in basically sketch comedy and vaudeville in 90 minutes in an Ernest movie. I mean, that's pretty ambitious, actually, when you think about it, I think.
A lot of more experienced directors could have fumbled that.
Yeah, 100% they could have. and with a much bigger budget to utilize.
Yep.
So I think, so I give the writing a lot of credit. Now, the individual elements are very basic.
Sure.
Which is why we're not talking 8 or 9 here. We're talking 7 because we have very basic elements. The reason which are competently written. Again, that word competent comes out. So you arrive at maybe like a 6 for everything individually, I think. It's the intertwining of them together in a way that's fairly effective from unexperienced folks that gives it that little boost. And that's where I arrive at 7 for writing for Ernest Scared. I did it again. Ernest Saves Christmas.
Scared by Christmas. Man, that's a missed opportunity. The Ernest Christmas Scarol?
Ernest Christmas Carol. Ernest Saves Stupid. Wait a second.
Yep. Oh boy. Well, in terms of my Ernest writing score, I agree with a lot of what you said, and I go a half a point below you.
Sure.
6.5. Again, above good. This is, I guess for me, everything you said is a cogent point, but I can't.
Thanks, I think.
I can't really heap additional praise beyond what I have for this movie based on the writing. Again, I think because they intelligently keep a lot of the components basic and simple, because they're juggling a lot, the sum of the parts sometimes comes off as a little tropey, a little, pedestrian, for lack of a better term. Which is, it's fine. I'm not looking for an Ernest movie to win any awards for best screenplay. But there's always a little bit more room for originality. And originality, though, is where I give it the rest of the score I'm giving it. In addition to spinning all those plates, in terms of my experience with movies, this is my first encounter with the idea and the concept that Santa Claus is a position to be passed on to successors more than an immortal man.
Right.
Now, this concept would be used in a much more prominent way a few years later by another Toy Story actor. Tim Allen's the Santa Claus, of course. But Ernest did it first.
That's right.
And I give it a lot of credit for that because that is high marks for originality. Again, maybe the concept existed in a different movie that I'm not familiar with, but for what I can recall, this is where it started.
Yeah.
So because of those reasons, I give the writing a 6.5.
All right, so that brings us to talk about writing in Christmas Vacation. Again, very high score on my end. This is where we start to pull away a little bit. It's going to become pretty obvious because once again, I'm going 9. Again, it's very tight comedy. This, in an academic sense, like if you kind of follow comedy sort of academically and whatever, you listen to comics talk about comedy, you listen to writers talk about writing comedy.
Sure.
This movie is very dense with jokes, both visual, verbal, combination of the two. Physical comedy, again, that's kind of performance, but it all weaves together. There's a lot of you talk about iconic lines in movies, and that's how you know something's written well.
Right.
There are an awful lot of those for me for this movie, so it's a little hard for me to separate in an objective way because we try to be objective on the show. That's why we have a scoring scale, but I read so many of the lines from this movie as iconic and legendary, and I'm not so sure that all of them are, but me and my aunts and uncles and family can just quote them endlessly. So the other day, somebody like bumped her head, and I was like, it's time to get a piece of government plastic in there. Like it just rolls off the tongue. So
right.
So again, high scores for writing, not only because the jokes are dense, but also because I find them to be very iconic throughout. Also, this movie might kind of come off a little bit, because it is a National Lampoon movie, it is a vacation movie, it's Chevy Chase. It might come off like sort of a little bit sharp, maybe a little bit snarky, maybe a little bit mean. But the underbelly of it, first of all, it is a John Hughes movie no matter what you do. So there's going to be sort of a soft, fuzzy underbelly to it. And
sure.
You eventually arrive there. There's this moment, when everything sort of comes to end or comes to closure at the end, and he sort of has this introspective moment about how he did it. He
right.
pulled off this family Christmas, and that was his whole motivation throughout the movie, was to have a big, good old-fashioned family Christmas. And then everything goes wrong along the way. But his motivation is always there as the foundation, and it comes back right at the end. So I like that in a sense that, again, they're handling this sort of little bit of a sarcastic, snarky comedy style, very densely written with jokes, but they're laying that on top of this sort of like wholesome foundation.
Yeah.
And they don't forget it. At the end, they come back to it.
Right.
So anyway, because they handle that so well in sort of a very understated, subtle way, because I find this movie to be wrought with iconic comedy lines, I arrive at my score of 9 for writing for Christmas Vacation.
Can't really argue terribly with any of that. I don't go quite as high, but just underneath at 8 for my writing score for Christmas Vacation. For a lot of the same reasons, once again. Key among those is that this is some career highlight writing from John Hughes in a career full of highlights.
Yes.
So, you're already starting off with something that's impressive. The story itself is note perfect in terms of nailing the universally relatable challenges in navigating a large family Christmas celebration. And, there's probably no other movie that people turn to for that quite the way they do with Christmas Vacation.
Mm-hmm.
You see it in other things. You see it in A Christmas Story. You see it in, maybe more modern things, Christmas with the Cranks or something.
Sure, Four Christmases.
Right.
Yeah.
You see that theme, and you see that attempt being made. But, this is the gold standard.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that comes down to Hughes' writing. The devil was in the details, and this is loaded with details. And I think so far you've seen kind of a recurring trend where this movie's getting high marks. Let's just call it what it is. And we're talking about writing, but it's all across the board in every category. It's doing the same thing. It's loading on the talent and the details and the attention to those details in every category. So again, the writing is no exception. And you might think that you're maybe a little more unique in terms of your family relationship to the movie, where you think everything is quotable.
Sure.
But pop culturally, now more than ever, I think that is bearing out to be true.
Yeah.
More than it's not.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of the most quotable movies of all time, of any genre.
You can buy a T-shirt that says "Shitter's full."
Exactly. I mean, in the end, again, you have your probably top 5 or 6, hugely known quotes that everybody. But even like the B tier and the C tier are just they're at everybody else's A tier.
Right? Yeah.
They're just so memorable and plentiful. And like you say, even the side characters are good for that. The yuppie neighbors, Todd and Margot. Why is the floor all wet, Todd?
I don't know, Margot.
Just those simple little. I mean, I don't know, Margot. Like, you can say that about anything, and I do.
Yes. So do I.
Anytime you get asked a question where the answer is I don't know, you have to throw in the Margot.
That's right. Absolutely, 100%.
And that again, that's a testament to the strength of the dialogue, and perhaps the ad-libbing performances. Who knows what the ratio is?
Mm-hmm.
But under the writing umbrella, this movie is just beyond solid.
Mm-hmm.
It is strong enough for me to give it an 8.
All right. So final round, we're going audio here, starting with Ernest. I'm giving it a score of 6. It's good. It's completely unmemorable. It doesn't stand out. It's not a detriment.
Agreed.
The mix is fine. Like, you never have issues with dialogue, sound effects.
Right.
The score is 100% forgettable. And, not to steal your thunder, but you mentioned as we were watching that they do build to like a score that's a little bit of a crescendo. They save all of it for right at the end of the movie in like the credits.
Yep.
And so they don't sort of like establish this ongoing earworm throughout the film.
It makes you think, where was this the whole time?
Yeah. So that's definitely a mistake. But what's there doesn't. I didn't cringe or say this is bad. I mean, so I just stay right at competent, right at good. So I have that score of 6, and I'm comfortable there. Not much to say about it because a score of 6 is kind of the most boring score because it's not bad enough for me to point out the faults. It's not good enough for me to point out what's memorable.
Sure.
So that's kind of how I arrive at a score like 6 for audio for Ernest Saves Christmas.
I am not too different. A lot of those same points and reasons are what I would say, and I would go even a point lower, give it a 5.
Sure.
Exactly for the lack of memorability of the score, and even sometimes when the score isn't so exciting, you can look to the soundtrack songs in a movie to fill in those blanks a little bit, and you can't hear.
No.
You really don't get anything. And I kind of remarked in the beginning of the movie that it felt very public domain-y in the score and some of the Norman Rockwell painting visuals. They were kind of cycling through of Santa advertisements and the old Coke Santa and things like that. And I mean, I guess it's competent, like you say. It does the job in a way that the music for a made-for-TV movie might.
Sure, it's a good comparison.
It almost feels that way,
despite
being a major theatrical release with a $6.5 million budget. So musically, it's not exciting. I will say that what I do give it credit for is it's live action cartoon-esque use of sound effects.
Sure, yes.
They're not.
You almost want more of it.
You do, and they're recognizable without being stock.
Mm-hmm.
They sound like they created their own versions of the typical sound effects.
Yeah.
Because you get, think of a cartoon sound effect. I mean, it's here.
Zing, boing.
Right.
Yeah.
Everything, explosions and zooming and whatever. But they sound unique to this movie, which I appreciate. So what I can give it credit for is that from an audio perspective. So again, I give Ernest Saves Christmas a 5.
All right, so then we're going to move on to the final individual score of the today's episode, and that's going to be the audio scores for Christmas Vacation. I am going to go with a 7, so it's getting a point over Ernest. Again, this movie does have a very strong earworm.
Yeah.
The original song Christmas Vacation will get in your head. The bass line for that movie or for that song sticks in my head. Doom 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 doom. Like, I'll do that all night long now that we're since when we finish recording this, I will continue to hum that for the rest of the night. But that's kind of it. There are moments. There's a decent soundtrack going on here. The overall score, it just services the movie. It's not a detriment. It doesn't really stand out except for that song, the theme song. Really, I guess is what you'd call it.
Hit you right at the beginning.
Yeah. But that's not really part of the score of the movie while you're watching it. So this movie does have. There are some interesting little sound effects moments, though. Specifically, when that ice goes shooting out of the gutter and smashes up Margot and Todd's new stereo. There's an interesting little. I can't recreate it.
Right.
But when it shoots, it sounds like it sounds like a laser beam in a science fiction movie. And it's this beam of ice just flying out of the gutter. So they do make some sort of like little interesting choices like that. When Uncle Lewis burns the tree, there's an explosion. Essentially, like you see it in frame, but it happens around the corner.
Right.
So all you see is a fireball. You just hear this. Again, just a fun sort of sound effect that they probably could have got away with not having,
right?
And it wouldn't have affected anything negatively. But they took the extra time to like give it something a little bit extra.
Yeah.
Because this movie's not cartoony to the level that an Ernest film is, and I'm not trying to say that.
Right.
But we definitely are beyond sort of like the realm of real world when it comes to the vacation movies.
Sure.
So we're not quite into the fantasy world, but like we're getting close to the line. Right. So it's interesting, and I think a good choice that they choose to sort of add in little moments like that, and I think it's to the movie's benefit. So again, kind of a strong score, not sky high, but obviously this movie's doing well in today's episode. So again, I'm giving Christmas Vacation a score of 7 for audio.
Well, for my Christmas Vacation audio score, I see your 7 and go up to 7.5. Based largely on the attributes and the strengths that you mentioned. And I'll just expand on those points. For me, I agree that the title theme song is just impactful. I don't want to say the word iconic again. Maybe it's not quite there, but it is definitely, pun intended, it has become a holiday staple. Performed by Mavis Staples, if you don't get the joke.
Go back and watch the basics. I mentioned that.
Yes. It's let's say you're putting together an annual Christmas playlist. How is that song not on there?
Oh yeah, that's a good one. Yeah.
That's the measure of how powerful it is. But beyond that song, this movie's score itself isn't necessarily doing anything any more memorable than Ernest.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But I would say that the way it uses musical cues to punctuate certain moments is much more effective in this movie, much better.
Yeah.
I think you see that in if you've seen the movie enough times, and you close your eyes right now, play those scenes in your mind's eye, but kind of eliminate visuals as much as you can, and you can still hear those moments just as strongly as you can see them. An example would be when he finally gets the lights to come on and the slow connection, and she turns the switch on, and all that converges, and it's the sound of him going but then right at the moment the choir and the sound of the power being generated all at once.
Yep.
So all these non-visual, all these audio components kind of gang up together to reinforce each other, and it's just, you see those kinds of things throughout this movie, which is why I have to give the scores of a 7.5 for audio for Christmas Vacation.
All right. That is all of our individual scores. We're going to step away for just 1 second. We have to do some tabulations, and we'll be back with a winner. All right, we're back, and we have some final scores to share. First up, we have Ernest Saves Christmas coming in with a score of 6.55, and with a score of 8, and today's win is National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. Any thoughts, Claude, about our final scores here?
perhaps to the surprise of nobody, Christmas Vacation takes the entire contest. Yeah, that's not surprising. What is surprising is how close technically they are. Less than a point and a half.
Yeah.
And it speaks to the strength of both of these movies and both of their really high value in terms of Christmas properties and just overall comedy performances.
Yeah, agreed. I think we were both actually a little bit surprised that Christmas Vacation didn't come in even higher.
Yeah.
Ernest Saves Christmas, I said it right that time, is really fun holiday movie, and I'm always up for watching Jim Varney engage in nonsense. And I think that the movie holds up pretty well for what it is. But Christmas Vacation is just kind of at another level. Sort of casually speaking, it's probably in my top 3 comedy movies of all time, without even talking about sort of holiday-specific movies.
Right.
It's right up there for me. So I never had a doubt that this would beat Ernest Saves Christmas in this case. I like both films, but Christmas Vacation is just sort of at another level in terms of my personal experience and opinion. So I'm not surprised to see that it won. If I were to sort of give you a score for it off the top of my head without thinking objectively and without thinking about the categories that we work with, I would have probably said, Christmas Vacation is a 9 out of 10. We come in today at an 8, which is kind of that's why we use the scoring scales that we use to sort of sometimes temper our nostalgia and our enthusiasm.
Still one of our highest rated movies.
Yeah, it's still a very strong score. And Ernest Saves Christmas, by the way, 6.55. That's not terrible. That equates to a very watchable, enjoyable movie.
We've scored it higher than a lot of bigger budget, more successful films.
Yeah, absolutely true. All right, so I guess that'll do it for this episode, the special holiday edition of Nerd Bomber versus Movies. You can find us here on YouTube. Obviously, you already have. The best place to find us, in addition to this, is on Instagram at NerdBomberPod, and from there you can find links to all of the stuff we do. For your friend Claude, I've been Just Jamie, and until the next battle,
we wish you the happiest Christmas since Bing Crosby tap danced with Danny fucking Kaye.
And the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled